Nous sommes très heureux de débuter cette nouvelle session de l'école d'été. C'est déjà la 4e session cette année à la faculté de médecine de Lyon-Est. Cette année, on devait se retrouver donc à Lyon. L'année dernière, on était à Shanghai. Ça n'a pas pu se faire comme prévu. On est passé sous un mode virtuel. Donc ça nous a posé beaucoup évidemment de frustration, de déception et en même temps aujourd'hui aussi beaucoup de joie de voir qu'on a réussi à s'adapter. C'était le but aussi du projet. On est sous la thématique intelligence artificielle dans les relations en santé en temps de pandémie et on pensait que la thématique avait du sens justement et ça a du sens qu'on le fasse aussi de cette manière-là en mode virtuel.
Je souhaite que cette école d'été de 2020, qui est très particulière, puisqu'elle se fait uniquement par Internet, soit quand même un succès. Et nous regrettons bien sûr l'absence de notre ami chinois qui participe avec nous par le cœur. Je vous souhaite pleine réussite à vous tous et vous avez tous mes vœux de succès et de bonheur.
My name is Estella. I'm a third-year medical student in Lyon, France, at faculté.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Mel Plémer, j'ai 24 ans. Je suis en 5e année de médecine, ce qui correspond à la 2e année d'externat dans le système français. J'ai déjà pu faire quelques
explore maybe our relations to the elderly, how we could maybe bring.
The theme of our group is about the change to a concept of consent due to the pandemic and its fake news.
What I would like to learn from the interaction between artificial intelligence and humanities. This is really a burning topic for all of us, I feel, and just the role that artificial intelligence will play in our world.
Déjà, c'est le fait que, je pense que l'intelligence artificielle, elle peut amener vraiment beaucoup de changements dans notre monde et notamment.
The potential topics I would like to explore: how do we make AI and machine learning more equitable? What are some current innovations in AI and mental health?
Et ce qui m'intéresse par rapport à l'intelligence artificielle et l'utilité.
And to just learn to know each other and work together around a theme that we chose. Moreover, the theme of this year's
one of the main questions I wanted to explore was, how can medicine make use of AI and humanities to complement each other rather than compete? I wanted to explore this concept in the local and global lens of how it impacts health disparities.
There is a lot of topics I would like to explore. Will the artificial intelligence...
What I worry about with artificial intelligence is that we're properly representing everybody in our samples. What doctors will use their extra time for.
In AI and the medical humanities, it would be the ethical aspects of it, especially how it pertains to data privacy and health equity.
J'ai vu qu'il y avait une grande diversité aussi d'étudiants qui viennent de 2e, 1re, 3e et 4e année de médecine. Et je trouve que ça peut être hyper riche de voir à quel point vous avez une vision différente de la médecine malgré les années, enfin avec l'apport des différentes années. Je pense que ça peut être une bonne base et c'était les deux choses que je voulais remonter aujourd'hui qui peuvent être hyper intéressantes à penser, à garder dans un coin de la tête.
As she said, there is a lot of topics that we loved. Myself, I especially loved the topic about social media and psychiatrics and intelligence, artificial intelligence.
Very nice. I think we have a lot of material to work and to figure it out right now, which group and everything. But I just want to say that I'm available for everyone, for the people I'll be tutoring and for the others too. If you guys need help on anything, I'm here. Thank you.
Les data, les données dépendent de dispositifs technologiques. Donc une biobanque va dépendre d'un ensemble de technologies spécifiques qu'on aura choisis. On va choisir de recueillir avec telle ou telle technologie, telle ou telle donnée. Des valeurs, des théories guident, filtrent, classent et trient ces données, qui ne sont jamais des données au sens de dons ou de données pures qui tomberaient ainsi comme ça ou qui seraient données dans la nature. Elles sont toujours déjà, d'une certaine façon, construites. Le stockage et le formatage de ces données conditionnent leur interprétation. Il y a un lien étroit aussi entre l'infrastructure du recueil de données et le pouvoir économique. On ne peut le nier. Google, Amazon, Apple, pour n'en citer que quelques-uns. Par suite, pour les algorithmes d'intelligence artificielle, le risque est de reproduire ces valeurs, ces théories implicites, ces présupposés, et de les renforcer. Vous connaissez sans doute cette histoire du chatbot T de Microsoft qui, en 2016, a appris en 24 heures à tenir des propos racistes.
Donc techniquement, un outil d'intelligence artificielle, c'est un outil qui s'inspire en effet du cerveau humain pour faire deux choses, pour apprendre sur de la donnée et pour prendre une décision. Et du coup, dit comme ça, un ordinateur qui apprend tout seul et qui prend des décisions, c'est un peu inquiétant, je vous l'accorde. Mais en fait, cette approche-là, ce n'est rien de plus qu'une approche biomimétique, c'est-à-dire qu'on s'inspire de la nature pour résoudre un problème. Et en fait, quand on regarde dans l'histoire des sciences, c'est une approche qu'on a à peu près tout le temps eue, en fait. On fait des observations, on expérimente, et à partir de ces expérimentations, on crée un concept. Et là, je prends l'exemple du vol, par exemple. On observe des oiseaux volent dans la nature, ça pourrait être sympa de voler, on va essayer de, par expérience successive, de reproduire ce que fait la nature, et quand on y arrive, on regarde quelles sont les expériences qui arrivent et on fait un concept de ce qui marche. Et on a ensuite le concept de comment voler avec des ailes. Et bien l'intelligence artificielle, pour un scientifique, c'est un peu la même approche. Pour lui, en tant que scientifique, c'est pareil. Alors la question qu'on peut se poser, c'est que oui, quand même, mais alors, en gros, un cerveau humain, c'est quand même 13 milliards de neurones et à peu près 1000 à 10 000 fois plus de connexions synaptiques. Mais maintenant, en fait, avec le développement des processeurs graphiques qui fonctionnent en parallèle, donc des petits processeurs qui sont très simples, mais on arrive justement à les miniaturiser de façon extrêmement petite et justement faire des calculs parallèles, on commence à arriver à des systèmes de réseaux de neurones artificiels qui n'approchent pas les 13 milliards de neurones, mais qui approchent des nombres de connexions et de neurones artificiels qui sont extrêmement importants.
I'm Christina, and I'll be starting the presentation today on fake news in the pandemic. So we see fake news on social media, but we also see it in the scientific community as well in the form of bad science. How does access to information impact a patient's ability to consent? And secondly, what ethical responsibilities do physicians have as mediators of patient education? So we explored these two questions through a combination of independent research and physician interviews.
Some patients ill with COVID-19 rejected some treatments and rejected being included in clinical trials because they wanted specific treatments. It didn't happen that much in Canada, but we saw it a lot in France. Physicians had to spend a lot of time deconstructing misconceptions. That's part of our jobs, but it took a lot more time than before when it came to educating patients.
So what does it imply? It implies that as a physician and members of the medical communities, we have two major responsibilities. We have one responsibility is to communicate scientific information to patients transparently, and we have responsibilities as members of the medical and scientific communities to educate the population and take the misconception of the population into consideration.
We, as doctors, have to inform patients with the most up-to-date data, mostly during the pandemic, because it could be hard for general population to have access to true information. And we have to inform them so they can make the most informed choices. So not for physicians alone, but as a community, we have to promote this vulgarization.
We can also educate the population as a member of medical communities. The importance of social media is considered more and more important today. For example, the Centers of Disease and Control and Prevention provide us with social guidelines. Some examples are to clearly define the objectives, to know your target audiences, identify best platform, keep content short and simple, give the most important information first, etc., etc. So to conclude, restricting access to fake news is important. We also have to give general population accurate information, and we have to, for that, we have psychology studies to better communicate risk to population, and we also have a lot of guidelines and guides to manage social medias.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your good job. So I don't know if anyone has to comment.
I think that we have a contradiction between the volunty of truth and the volunty of lie, and the problem is to evaluate and we have exposed the very good reason of that by emotion, by difficulty to deconstruct the misconception, and the problem is also the education of the media in the population.
J'aurais peut-être voulu répondre quelque chose à chaud à Monsieur Andrieusz. I don't know if I will be able to talk in English, but the problem is not only educating the population, it's also educating the physicians.
I understand this point, and it's the problem because in this crisis, because the physicians are all presented like the high level of information and science. The problem of formation of this physician appear, but after the crisis, not in the crisis.
So without further ado, my name again is Jad. I'm representing Ottawa. I'm a third-year medical student. Here we have the definition of what is transhumanism or transhumanism. So it's the concept of improving or augmenting indefinitely using material technologies, the capacities and cognitive, emotional, physical performance of individuals. Essentially here, what we're going to talk about now are the three major philosophical ideas that will elaborate. So the first one being that we use medicine in a therapeutic manner to improve and augment. The second one being the concept of increasing longevity of life. And the third one being the concept of eugenism. So Luc Ferry here talked about 8 innovations that refer to le transhumanisme or transhumanism. So he mentioned there was an acronym which N for nanotechnologies, B for biotechnologies, I for anything related to computer technology, and C being cognitism, he called it, or artificial intelligence, that he divided into strong artificial intelligence and weak artificial intelligence. So now we have prosthetics. You can see pictures here. We have pacemakers, cochlear implants, using extracorporeal circulation, or ECMO in French. And then here we have the concept of shortening vocal cords. And the concept is for the people that are that do a conversion of sex, what they would do is that they would shorten the length of the vocal cord. So because I have only a few minutes left, I'm just going to finish off with the discussion. So we had Mayel on one side and Francis discussing. So we were asking, does artificial intelligence affect our body? So would we still be our body? Would we keep our body? If we do anything to modify it, would we still be ourselves? So on one side, Mayel was saying, I think that we would keep our identity. Whereas on the other side, Francis would say, well, as long as we're not adding something in ourselves, that we would keep our identity, but in other contexts, the identity would be compromised. And they were discussing and debating to what extent is, for example, Jade going to stay Jade if he uses more and more artificial intelligence.
We go on the transhumanism topic now, okay? Maybe Bernard, Andrieux.
Yes. Thank you, Marceau. Thank you for your presentation. I think that it's very interesting by a general presentation of transhumanism, but I think it's so general because what is the difference with posthumanism and transhumanism? What is the difference with cyborg and robotization? What is the difference with hybridation and the mixed hybridation with natural part and artificial part? I think it's a very different situation.
What is interesting is, for a certain point of view or in certain context, an ideal body now, in ideal prosthetics, for example, can be perfect for the world where you are living now, but tomorrow can be different. So you have to change, and you have to change all the time.
Isabella?
Yes, I want to point out coming out from this really interesting ontological discussion, and goes more into the term of innovation that is related to transhumanism. Because for me, this is really dangerous as well, because when we talk about innovation, we talk about in the industry. So we talk about the possibility of commercialize and sell this kind of technology. For me, there is a bit biaisé by this kind of oppression that some people have in interest in commercial interest in this technology.
Our project is titled Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, Catalysts or Measures of Social Disparities. There's a growing evidence and research evidence that shows that the COVID-19 pandemic has really shown a lot of the pre-existing social and health disparities within Canada, France, and globally as well. So what COVID-19 and the global pandemic has done is it highlighted what exists every day AI is used in our everyday life. So over here, you can see that it's involved in search predictions using data collected through all searches on Google. It's used in the judicial system. So in New York, they have an algorithm based on hundreds and thousands of data where it basically informs the judge like how likely a person who is on trial to run away. And at the same time, also within our everyday life, cars are now using AI. There's self-driving cars. So within medicine, there's definitely a lot of uses of AI. So for example, the Framingham Heart Study to predict risk of cardiovascular events. And also, of course, skin imaging collaborations to detect melanoma and distinguishing between benign and malignant moles. And finally, one of the more interesting aspects of AI within medicine that I found was the use of signal processing. And here it's basically a project that predicts birth of asphyxia using a birth cry recordings of children using mobile phones.
So in AI, you have a lot of bias. One of the bias is inside the data. It refers to historical inequalities, like racism. This is one of the many examples of over-representation of certain populations within the datasets. You can also have under-representation of marginalized groups. AI itself generally won't introduce bias, it's the data. AI is an instrument like anything else, and it has a lot of potential for reducing the disparities we were talking about because of easier access and patient engagement. A responsible way to develop AI is achievable. It's not a dream unachievable. The design teams need to be aware that biases exist and have various causes. They need to be always asking themselves if their work is equitable. One way to achieve this is to have inclusive teams with a lot of different types of people, including marginalized people.
So thanks so much for this very rich presentation, all of you. It's quite dense and rich. We will start now the discussion and give the floor to Bernard Andrieux if you want to start, maybe.
It's a sort of possibility to invent inclusive artificial intelligence to include the subjectivity, the partiality of information, but perhaps you can use of this inclusive activity. Artificial intelligence to invent other possibility of action with this population.
All of this is happening so quickly, and seeing some of the ways that AI can harm these vulnerable populations, but help them as well, that it's difficult to know what the ultimate balance between those two things will be. We may not find out for many years what the actual impact of some of these interventions has been. So even these, our best intentions can be limited by not thinking about all the vulnerable populations properly. And it's important, I think, that we don't forget about this and that we keep studying it over the next couple of years.
We take a 5-minute break and we start in 5 minutes the final discussion for these 3 presentations. Is it okay?
Nous sommes ici à l'hôpital de la Croix-Rousse, à l'Institut des agents infectieux, où nous avons tenu donc la troisième journée de l'école d'été médecine et humanité. Aujourd'hui, donc, nous avons pu voir les travaux qui ont été réalisés par les différents groupes d'étudiants. Ils ont restitué le travail qu'ils ont fait sur les thématiques choisies, sur le thème de l'intelligence artificielle. Et nous avons pu échanger avec des experts français sur ces sujets et avoir leur réaction par rapport au travail des étudiants. Nous allons continuer demain ce travail. Les 2 derniers groupes vont nous présenter leurs travaux et nous allons finir les tables rondes demain pour la clôture de cette école d'été.
So today we're going to ask ourselves to what extent the new interfaces improve the relationship between patients and health workers. So the need for teleconsultation. Before it was thought to be, not so many people use it, and you could think it would help disabled people who wouldn't have to go to the doctor physically, which can be a real burden. It turns out we found a new need today. It is in times of crisis, such as the COVID crisis with social distancing and confinement. So there has been a huge growth of teleconsultations at this moment. So we see that there are many uses for regular general practitioners medicine or psychiatry too, and follow-up of chronic patients, but we always have to be mindful of how we use it. This makes us think about the future of telemedicine. As we see, it relies on the trust and on the relationship between a doctor and a patient, or between any health worker and a patient. It raises more interrogations about the questions of responsibility and error, which will be talked about with Jake.
So the main question we're looking at is who bears the responsibility for making these medical decisions. Manufacturers of the product, the doctor who administers its use, or for some theorists, they consider the AI program itself. So first we look at the manufacturer. In this view, we have to consider the AI program as just a medical device, like no different from an MRI machine or a pacemaker. AI programs are constantly learning from experiences and changing over time, so they're evolving. Many manufacturers would argue that these changes are beyond their control and that they can't be held accountable for anything other than the initial product they handed over to physicians. What happens if we consider putting the blame on doctors? In this view, we have to see the AI program as an assistant to the physician, and consequently the doctor is still responsible for any mistakes made. Finally, our third option is more theoretical to us lay people, but it's garnered considerable attention among computer scientists. After considering all 3 parties for blame, it seems likely that society will want to upset the status quo, and physicians will continue to carry the responsibility for patient care. It's therefore up to them to only use safe products that they understand and can trust. It then must become the burden of the manufacturers to prove to physicians their products meet that criteria. And I believe the first step in this process is for governments to create straightforward regulations for manufacturers to follow. Chief among those regulations should be to make programs as transparent as possible. Transparency is important because it will allow doctors and patients to better understand how the AI program can improve their individual care, which leads to quicker adoption.
Quand le médecin est pleinement responsable, quand il prend pleinement sa décision, c'est pas difficile. Il y a un problème, c'est lui le responsable. OK. Donc jusque-là, pas trop de problème. Là où ça se complique, et vous l'avez très très bien montré dans votre présentation, c'est quand effectivement la décision va être préconditionnée par l'intelligence artificielle. Vous avez fait ressortir 3 acteurs clés, l'industriel, le manufacturer, les docteurs, puis les programmes. Vous pouvez introduire un 4e, le patient, et à partir de là, imaginez une responsabilité partagée dans le cadre d'un contrat particulier qui pourrait être passé. Vous voyez bien qu'ici, si vous limitez cette question de la relation au champ contractuel, ce qui est un petit peu le propos du discours dans la présentation, eh bien, vous tombez dans des impasses qui ont été bien soulignées, c'est-à-dire qu'on en arriverait à condamner un programme. Vous voyez que dans le droit contemporain, en France en tout cas, c'est quelque chose qui n'est pas possible. Pourquoi ? Parce que cette notion de responsabilité qui est centrale, que vous avez mise en évidence dans votre présentation, elle est étroitement liée à la notion de volonté et de raison. On ne peut en France condamner que des êtres raisonnables.
At least in our medical legal system, the thing that gets evaluated from a legal perspective is what was the thought process that led to that harm? And so the fascinating thing, obviously, now with AI is we won't necessarily know why decisions were made, and we won't be able to go back and evaluate whether they were reasonable. And so I find it interesting. I don't think it's going to just be a matter of, are we shifting liability from doctors and companies and moving it towards AI? I think overall we're going to see less liability.
We're presenting on AI in geriatric care. Through research, we've seen that France is actually seen that 1 in 3 seniors live alone. And in Canada, that's similar because 92% of seniors live in a private home. So there needs to be some solution to address this increasing demand and increasing costs. We can use AI to ensure the health of the older population is through home telemonitoring. So this is the automated process of transmitting patient healthcare data from the home to the healthcare provider. And this is actually shown to decrease the mortality and emergency care rates. And so some of the consequences, AI can decrease the individual illness experience, and it can cause the patient to be seen as their health issue. It can lead to discrimination due to ethics and age generalizations based off of some of the stuff we'd actually talked about before. It can also lead to dehumanization, which kind of talks about the datification of patients and how human contact can be lost. And disciplination, which kind of talks about the surveillance and monitoring of a person's activity. And if they diverge from this activity, they're forced to do certain things to maintain their health, but this can be seen as an intrusion of privacy. And then these are just some solutions to address these concerns. For example, ensure that they're voluntarily engaging with this technology, that we have more research from marginalized populations, that we look into the acceptance rates of AI with older adults, and we only give this AI to those who need it rather than giving it to everyone.
I will talk about the social issue of the aging population. The loneliness is a big problem because we know that social distancing is negative for our health, and the aging population don't have this familiarity with new technology, and it's difficult for them to communicate with the relatives. So AI can act as an older person's safety net. I found the 2 principal solutions: the voice-based virtual assistant, like Amazon Echo, Google Home, and we have virtual companions. It's a robotic dog, and it's giving fun to the older people. These solutions have limits. First of all, no, it's not the robots are not substitutes to a real relationship, and I think the main problem is the cost and the ecological impact.
Cette intelligence artificielle, elle était perçue jusqu'à présent comme avec beaucoup de méfiance, beaucoup de prudence. Ce qu'il faut constater avec l'effet Covid, c'est que ça a accéléré les usages parce qu'on n'avait pas le choix. La télémédecine qui est évoquée dans la présentation, d'une manière ou d'une autre, c'est quelque chose qui existe depuis une vingtaine d'années. Donc c'est pas révolutionnaire. Ce qui est révolutionnaire, c'est la généralisation et la vitesse d'appropriation. Qui aurait imaginé il y a encore 2 mois ou 3 mois la généralisation des tablettes auprès des personnes âgées nonagénaires, voire quasi centenaires, dont on imaginait que finalement c'était tellement loin de leur univers. C'est-à-dire que là, il y a quelque chose de nouveau qui est apparu, c'est que cette pandémie, elle a permis une accélération des nouveaux usages, mais elle a surtout fait en sorte que maintenant, il y a des besoins qui ne seront plus négociés.
My biggest concern with AI and our geriatric population, it is almost entirely going to be about cost. I don't think it's that we are giving better care to geriatric populations with these technologies. but we are certainly going to be giving cheaper care. What I fear is that they are going to be given a false choice. And we're going to say, well, if you want to stay in your home, the only way to do it is by using these technologies. And if you don't adopt these if you don't want that, you have to go to a home. And that's going to be the false choice. And so there will no longer be the option to stay at home without artificial intelligence.
I don't feel I'm an expert in the field, so I will say the very interesting dialogue, certainly making me think about a lot of things. I have two elderly parents who are starting to need care, and it's a question for the patients, it's a question for the caregivers, but it's also a question for the society at large in terms of, you know, the olden days. The elderly would be cared for by the families at home. It's a very complex issue with some wonderful points to consider from both of our guests with relation to telemedicine and AI and how that's going to change, I think, life in general.
Thank you.
So we'll be in touch.
See, we'll be in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye, Christina. Bye-bye, Francis. Bye-bye, everybody. Léa. Bye-bye. Eh ben, ça y est, on l'a fait.
Bon.
On l'a fait. On l'a fait. Nous terminons donc cette école d'été un peu particulière en distanciel avec nos collègues canadiens. Les débats ont été très riches et nous sommes tous maintenant dans la construction d'une synthèse de cette école d'été. Et ça va nous préparer, va nous lancer pour le prochain épisode dans l'été 2021. Donc à 2021.